Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much again for taking the time to find value and to listen to this study as we are going through the book of Daniel. And as you can see on your screen, we are in Daniel chapter 5, chapter 7, verse 15. Coming back again after a little bit of a time off. Appreciate you still coming back and listening. And as we are going through Daniel and looking at these dreams, again, just wanted to remind myself and share with the viewpoint that I try to take as I'm going through this, that there's a lot of things in here that are challenging to understand. There are many Bible scholars out there that far surpass anything I can bring to the table who have looked at these dreams and analyzed them and tried to compare them with prophecy, with other books of the Bible that have similar dreams, namely Ezekiel, and then also the book of Revelation for Christians compare many of these. There's messianic prophecies in here. And so there's many different ways to look at this. And I surely don't claim any expertise in any of those things. I just try to look at it from a viewpoint of what can this do to encourage me in my walk with God and apply to where I am today. I know things will be happening. I know that things are happening in our world today that are very concerning. Many will apply the events that are happening in our country and in other countries around the world as looking at what is known as end time prophecy. And we may touch on a little bit of that, but what I am encouraged with right now and what I'm going to be bringing out is looking at the words themselves in the original language. Chapter 7, as we know from some of the previous chapters, is written in Aramaic, which is a somewhat of a sister language to Hebrew. Um, when we get to the end of chapter 7, which we might do today, that will end the Aramaic language. And then in chapter 8, it switches back to Hebrew again. And of course, there are all uh, thoughts as to, well, why did this happen? And how, you know, why are there two languages in the Bible? And we don't have those answers. What we are able to do is see what we can learn from it, from both a cultural aspect, a historical aspect, and then in the language itself, what it can teach us and what we can learn. And today's verse, as we start out in verse 15, Daniel has seen this vision. It appeared to be a vision that occurred to him at night, so we could say that it was a dream that he had, and it left a very strong impact on him. And that's what caught my attention for this study is, um, if I was Daniel or you were Daniel and you had this dream, I mean, obviously it would shake you. It would affect you. Daniel, of course, had a relationship with God. This is not the first time that God has moved in his life and worked miracles, given him insight and understanding. And so maybe in a way he was somewhat accustomed to experiencing the supernatural. Um, but yet this took him to another level where it really troubled him. And so that's how the verse starts out. And Daniel is saying he was grieved in his spirit. And I'm reading in an interlinear fashion, so I'm kind of putting these interpretations or translation together. It was grieved in his spirit within his body, and the visions of my head troubled me. Just the way this sentence is constructed caused me to just kind of perk up and say, wow, this is not how I would think I would talk if I had gone through this. Is it is there something in the way these words are expressed that can help us to understand more how Daniel was feeling? So also when I notice that this last word here that's translated as troubled me, in English, to say something troubles you, okay, I don't obtain a sense of intensity. I'm not overwhelmed with emotion on it. but yet when I look at the Hebrew, it calls this a PL form of the verb. PL form of the verb is one of the most intense type of verbs. And yes, this is Aramaic, but it still relates in a way, telling me that this word is very intense and was not translated into English as such. So I want to show you another fun little tool in Bible Hub, and that is called Parallel. So I'm going to go up and pick the Parallel, and what it does is it goes through all of the English translations and gives you this verse in all these translations. So you can look through that. Remembering there are at least 150, 140 different English translations of the Bible. So while I don't want that to be something that's discouraging to you, what I want to show you is that these words are very difficult to translate, and a person's relationship with God, their cultural setting, their background, their upbringing, the school they went to, all of this can have an influence on how they translate these words into English. And that's why we have so many English translations. For us, rather than let it discourage us, to me, it's an encouraging thing that it gives me different viewpoints. It allows me to uh, prayerfully and carefully allow God to guide me and say, well, what do I resonate with? What speaks to my heart when I study this verse? And how can God use this to speak to me on an individual level where I'm at with my relationship with God? And so that's how I like to look at these verses. So here it says that International Version, his Daniel was disturbed, his mind was disturbed, troubled in spirit. Here, New Living Translation takes it to the more intense level, saying that these visions terrified him. Here it says the vision alarmed him. King James again says troubled. New King James doesn't change that. Here's alarming, alarming, agitating me, terrifying me. So here, Contemporary says that he just didn't know what to think. Here it says his visions frightened him. Here he was deeply disturbed. Alarming seems to be getting a lot of uh, selection here. Here, Smith's was terrifying me. So as you can see, there's many different ones. Also, there's an Aramaic translation of the Bible. It uses the word troubled. And then, of course, the Hebrew version, the JPS says it frightened me. So a lot of different understandings. So let's first take a look at the um, Hebrew uh, sages that we've been looking at. And here that uses the word frightened me. And let's just see if they have any comments on here. Um, Here it says that he was pained, and others propose the renderings are anxious, and it ranges from anxious to horrified to grieved. And then I found this one very interesting. It talks about when it says that it troubled him in his body. It's saying here that the Aramaic word is literally the word for a sheath. And I thought that was very interesting to think of, what our bodies are. And surely there is a supernatural and a spiritual realm here because Daniel is saying that his spirit within him was grieved within the sheath, and translated as his body. So we see kind of a spiritual realm going on here that Daniel knew he was in a spiritual realm, but yet he knew he was still in a physical realm. So let's go and unpack these words and just see what they tell us. And fortunately, with Bible Hub, all we got to do is click on this little number here. It leads us to an unpacking of the word kara, which means literally a leg or a thigh. And here's where this gets just so fascinating as these definitions that have what are called their literal definitions of leg and thigh really is being translated here and means to grieve. And it gives us the understanding that is from an unused root word that means to bend. So something is happening in this movement of a leg or a thigh bending, and it talks about a connection to animal sacrifices in different rituals. It talks about the thigh being a symbolizing of strength and support. Well, the strength and support was bending, so it was losing the support, and that's where they get the definition of being distressed of the leg of the thigh was losing its support. To me, this is just a joy. I find so much fascination in this, and it also gives me a personal application here is saying that here he's saying his spirit, which was supporting him like a leg or a thigh, was bending. That his support of this was so overwhelming to him that his foundation was being shaken, might be another word. His inner core of spirit that normally sustains him was finding itself being bent or heavily loaded to the point where he didn't know if he could be supported by it. So again, a beautiful expounding of this. And then we get to these words here of, begow is translated within, but it really has a deeper thought here. It comes from this word gav, which is talking about the back or the body or the middle. It's the hollow part. So I love the imagery here of what I feel he's talking about his spirit being sheathed or housed inside of his body in this hollow emptiness of his body is where the spirit is, which is who he's really relating to. He's not thinking about his earthly body. Obviously, Daniel at this time was very aged, over 80 years of age, but yet he's not talking about his body hurting, his aches and pains, which is something very common as we age becomes the topic of our conversation and most of our conversations if you interact with people who are now going through the aging process. It's unfortunately can be very cruel and can be very trying for them. You don't hear any of that of Daniel. He's not complaining about his aches and pains and his, doctor visits and things like that. He is grieved in his spirit, and it's totally superseding anything that's happening in his body, and his body is only secondary here. He's looking at it as just a sheath or just a hollowed out frame in which he is currently dwelling. But what's really troubling him is what is going on in his spirit. And so we look at this next word of need nay, of translated as body. And it comes up again as the word for sheath. And of course, the Jewish sages talked about it as a sheath like you would put a sword in. And I think that's a great imagery here of this body of Daniel housing the spirit that's within him. And of course, this was a spiritual journey he was on. He was interacting with God through his spirit, which again is taxes my ability to understand. Um, Many of us, myself included, have had spiritual experiences where we've felt God's presence, experienced God's presence in many different ways. Some of us have had an experience like in the book of Acts where they've experienced God's presence, as I have had that experience. And yet, to try to describe it, try to find a vocabulary that adequately can explain what it is to be in a spiritual realm really is challenging for us. We know something's out there and we've had glimpses of it. We've had moments where we've experienced it, but it still eludes us. And no different here for Daniel as he's trying to explain what's going on. He's had this experience. He calls it a vision here in this word that we're going to open up for 2376. And again, this calls it a sight, and it doesn't give us a lot. Unfortunately, in the Aramaic, doesn't have quite the vocabulary background, quite the dictionary content that Hebrew does. And here, this word shezu refers to a vision, often of a prophetic or a divine nature. So I think it's kind of neat that the biblical languages have a word to describe spiritual things, which we at least lack in English for this aspect of it. It was just translated vision. But here, this word lets the reader know that this was not just a bad dream because he had pizza the other night and didn't sleep well. This was a vision of a divine nature given in a supernatural revelation to a prophet of God, to someone who God communicates his will, his guidance, and future events. And this specific word is just for that. And that's just so incredible to learn that. And all of this was very overwhelming for Daniel. It says that his head, which here the word is reshi, very similar to the word in Hebrew of rosh, for head, and it said that it troubled him. So again, this is in a PL form, very intense. We also notice that it's in an imperfect form. In Hebrew and in Aramaic, there are at least basically two types of tenses, if we can call them that. The perfect and the imperfect, or the completed and the incompleted, are a better way to think of it. So Daniel is saying that this vision caused him to be troubled. Now this is translated in a past tense form, saying it troubled him. But the word itself is really saying it's not completed yet. It's imperfect, which means that he's not over this. This is something he's living at the moment. He hasn't come to a conclusion, hasn't come to the end of it. It's continuing in his life, and he hasn't reached the end of it yet. So it's still in an imperfect form. And here, the translations that they had available here are to be dismayed, which to me is a very less intensive form, but it's to otherwise to terrify or to hasten. I can only imagine if I had received this same vision, I would be on the very extreme end of terrified, a very extreme end of being emotionally disturbed and just overcome by this type of uh, vision that I had. And so that's where I think Daniel is. And I hope that with just unpacking this, it creates a word picture so that you, as I am now, understand where Daniel's coming from. We can see and feel the emotion that has come into his life from having this vision, and now brings us to a place where we can move on and say, okay, what is this doing to him? What's he feeling? He's had this vision. And so we get to verse 16, and let's just, before we jump into the interlinear, let's look down and look at how he um, spoke as far as translated by the Jewish sages. So verse 16 says, and he came near unto one of them that stood by. Now he's in his dream. He is having this fear, and there is one who is telling him this. And it doesn't describe it as an angel. It doesn't describe it in any way. He just says it's one of them that stood by. I'd love to know more of what he really saw. But what we do know is that Daniel's not frightened by this person. If this was a scary type of vision of this person, he would be afraid to go up to him. It looks like Daniel has no problem whatsoever, and he's moving in his dream. He's seeing himself. He's seeing this person because it says, "I came near to one of them that stood by." So does that mean that there was more than one? And it's obviously not the scary guys that were being talked about, but these are non-scary people, so that Daniel feels comfortable in their presence, feels he can come to them and ask for the interpretation. It's really interesting, the conversation that goes on here, because he comes to him and says, can you tell me the truth concerning this? Very interesting that he uses the word truth. We would not speak like this. We would say, can you give me the interpretation? Can you tell me what's going on? So there's this interesting choice of words that Daniel uses here. And so he says, can you tell me the truth concerning this? And how Daniel records this, it says, so he told me and made me to know the interpretation of these things. So here we see he's asking for the truth. What he's getting is the interpretation. And again, Daniel's at the mercy of this one who was standing next to him. He obviously felt that he was in a safe enough environment that he could go and talk to this individual, this person. I don't even know how to describe it. A person is not correct because that would be more of a human type. Um, but it doesn't say if it was angelic or spirit. It doesn't say he could see through him, it was in a spirit form or a solid form. We just don't know. But Daniel spoke to this being. The being then replied. Daniel heard. So there was a sound. There was something that Daniel could comprehend and began to give him um, this understanding. So here in verse 16, the sages unpack that he came near, took place in a dream. Here they call it one of the attending angels that are there. Um, and so they talk about this as an angelic figure. And what it makes reference to is Zechariah. Um, it looks like chapter 1, verse 9, and chapter 2, verse 2, that would use similar language. Now, again, this is comparing Aramaic that Daniel is referencing here to Hebrew, which is being referenced in Zechariah. So, similar words, not exact words, but they're comparing that this was an angelic being. So what we have to ask ourselves is, do we see any of that in the language itself? So as we look at verse 16, we look at these words, kirvet had, which is one. I came near to one. Mean is of, by or for, and then Maya, and this is the word for standing by. So it's just one who stood by. This is just interesting too. Okay, this being was standing there and wasn't moving around, wasn't excited. It was just standing there. And I find that's just interesting how Daniel um, describes this being. And then Vayet Sevi Siva, the truth of I asked, it's the word Amar, I believe, and then of him, all of this. And then here is the word that Amar, he told me. So he's asking, and he told me the interpretation of it. Let's take a look at this word interpretation, because see if there's any interpretation of the word interpretation. It is the word pashar. And that is a word that's used in the study of the Hebrew language. They say there's different levels of understanding. First is what's called the pashat, which is the simple, the straightforward understanding. And this word pashar in the Aramaic, it comes from it, means just to interpret. So what Daniel's going to get here is a straightforward, simple, basic interpretation of it, which is called the Pashar, or in Hebrew would be called Pashat. And so let's keep that in mind as we go through this, because um, with this interpretation, I believe we're going to see different levels coming out. We're going to see what is on the surface, or the pashar, the pashat, and then there's going to be what is a deeper level. Is there something that piques our interest here, that wants us to investigate, is this prophetic? When is this going to happen? Is this something that is going to happen in Daniel's lifetime? Is this something which happened, prior to Jesus's coming? Is this something that happened after Jesus's coming, but prior to the age we're living in now? Or is it something that's yet to happen in the future? Or is it all of the above? Many times I'm finding in the Hebrew study, we have to look at it that this can be yes, 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 meaning all of the above, that it happened at his time. It happened maybe again similarly after Jesus's time, but yet a form of it can also be thought to happen or believed to happen in the future. And we'll see how the Jewish sages handle this, because normally they will just notice what has happened in their time frame, in the era in which they are most concerned with. And so when we come back next week, we'll begin to look at the interpretation that this one being gave to Daniel, and try to unpack it a little bit more. So God bless you. Thank you so much for being a part of this study. I look forward to being with you again next week. Bye-bye.